The air was thick with the scent of pine and freshly turned soil as the HOA once again crossed a line that should never have existed. This time, their intrusion took the form of cutting down trees on my shed, an act of blatant disregard for property, history, and authority. The shed itself was no ordinary structure. It was a part of the farm's legacy, standing as a repository for decades of tools, crops, and memories carefully preserved by generations. To see its surroundings mutilated was an affront not just to the physical property but to the heritage it represented. I arrived on the scene with a calm determination, aware that any rash reaction could escalate the situation unnecessarily. The damage was apparent. Stumps, scattered branches, and felled timber littered the ground. Yet, it was the arrogance of the HOA's officers, their assumption that they could act without repercussion, that truly demanded a response. I assessed the situation methodically, documenting every cut, every trace of intrusion, and every officer present, ensuring a complete record for legal and administrative follow-up. Rather than relying on words alone, I implemented a multifaceted response that combined legal authority, strategic planning, and practical enforcement. The officers were immediately informed of the full scope of the consequences. Not only would the destroyed trees require restoration, but the entire property was protected under regulations that carried substantial penalties for destruction or trespass. I made it clear that their actions were unacceptable and that accountability would be enforced without exception. The reaction of the HOA was telling. Initially confident and dismissive, their faces shifted from arrogance to concern as the legal ramifications and the magnitude of the damage were explained. Their assumptions of immunity evaporated under the weight of preparation and documented authority. Each officer quickly realized that the attempt to impose control had not only failed but had placed them in direct violation of property law, historical preservation statutes, and agricultural regulations. To further solidify the response, I oversaw the restoration of the shed's surroundings, ensuring that every felled tree was replaced or compensated for, every branch removed, and the area returned to its original state. At the same time, measures were put in place to prevent future unauthorized access. Reinforced boundaries, enhanced surveillance, and carefully monitored entry points ensured that any repeat attempts at intrusion would be immediately detected and addressed. Beyond the immediate restitution, I issued a formal notice of damages and accountability, totaling $1.5 million, accompanied by clear directives for full restoration. This was more than an administrative action. It was a demonstration that authority, preparation, and the enforcement of legal rights could counter audacity and assumed power. The HOA officers, now fully aware of the severity of their misstep, were compelled to comply, their arrogance subdued by the clear and deliberate assertion of control. As evening approached, the farm began to settle back into its natural rhythm. The shed stood firm, the restored trees swayed gently in the breeze, and the land exuded a quiet sense of resilience. The surrounding fields, once disturbed by the unauthorized cutting, returned to calm, and the farm itself reflected the balance of preparation, authority, and decisive action. The HOA's attempt at dominance had not only failed but had reinforced the sovereignty of the property in the eyes of all who observed. Walking along the perimeter, I reflected on the broader lesson. Intrusion, when met with foresight, documentation, and lawful authority, will always meet consequences. The destruction of property, no matter how bold or persistent, cannot withstand preparation and the calculated enforcement of rights. The farm, its structures, and its legacy had endured yet another challenge, emerging stronger, more secure, and unequivocally protected. Night fell over the ranch, the lodge casting a warm glow across the restored grounds. The wind carried the soft murmur of wildlife resuming their routines, and the fields reflected the stars above. The HOA officers had learned, through hesitation and compliance, that intrusion and assumption of authority carried tangible repercussions. The farm, its shed, and the surrounding environment stood unassailable, a fortress of preparation, knowledge, and deliberate enforcement. By the time the land settled completely into quiet, the message was clear and enduring. Attempts to undermine authority or interfere with property are met not with anger, but with strategy, foresight, and lawful action. The HOA had crossed the line, but in doing so, they reaffirmed the resilience, sovereignty, and security of everything they sought to control. The legacy of the farm, preserved through generations, remained intact, untouchable, and defended with unwavering precision.